Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Solution Spotlight. I am going to give maybe a minute or so before we really kick things off, but we'll get started here shortly. We were just talking about, well, I was kicking off a kind of like this intro where I'm having all of these allergies from pet dander because I'm watching some dogs. And then Colin was talking about his 10-month-old lab and just a lot of like pet talk.
Yeah, and I was telling Sarah he might make an appearance. He's down at my feet right now, and if you have a puppy, 10-month-old labs don't sit still long, so he might walk around and receive a couple pets here and there.
I would love that guest appearance. That would make this webinar so much better. Already magnified. But let's kick things off, shall we? So, welcome everybody to today's Solution Spotlight. Is your practice prepared for the largest wealth transfer in history? My name is Sarah Williams. I am XYPN's Senior Partnerships Operations Manager and your host for today's webinar. And joining me today are Colin Yakel, CFP, Director of Trading at InvestNet Money Guide, and Brad Barker, Account Manager at InvestNet Money Guide, and also XYPN's dedicated point of contact for the Money Guide product. Now, over the next 2 decades, we can expect to see the largest wealth transfer in history, trillions of dollars moving from baby boomers to younger generations. And the question isn't whether it will affect your clients, but really how you are going to guide them through it. And today, Colin and Brad will share strategies for bridging those generations, preserving legacies, and using technology to facilitate these conversations and make them easier and more impactful. Before we do that, I'm going to review some housekeeping items. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of this Zoom chat, Zoom webinar, whatever it is. And as questions come up throughout Colin's presentation, please drop them in that Q&A tab. That's going to help just filter in all of those questions, make it very easy to grab them, and then Colin will answer them as they come up throughout the presentation or at the end, depending on how many come through at a time. And then we have a couple of events coming up on the XYPN side. Only one webinar next month on September 10th. It's Ask Me Anything Compliance Edition with the XYPN compliance team. And then in the end of September, XYPN Live is coming. So that is going to be amazing. It's in Austin, Texas, September 25th to the 27th. We hope that you're able to join, and I will drop both of the registration links in the chat below so that you can register as you need. And then this webinar has been accepted by the CFP board for one CFP CE credit. And as a reminder, to receive that credit, you must meet the CFP attendance threshold of 50 minutes and have provided your CFP ID during the registration process. So you are eligible for a CFP credit. Hooray! Anyways, that is all of the housekeeping items. I'm going to now turn it over to Colin and Brad to talk about the wealth transfer history.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you everyone for joining. Yeah, the fact that this qualifies for an hour of C is always a nice add-on. I've got my at the end of September is when my renewal is due, and there's no rolling 2-year period that goes by faster than when I need to get my CE requirement knocked out. So Sarah, I might be hitting you up after this to see if I can get the hour credit as well. But I want to say welcome to everyone. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Colin Yakel. I'm the Director of Training here at InvestNet Money Guide. And talking to you today about a topic that is probably not new to folks on the line. The great wealth transfer. It's an extremely hot topic right now. There's tons of articles going around about it. I think today's going to offer a slightly different take in that it will talk to an extent about estate transfer and making sure that you're initiating those discussions with clients, as it is an expectation for a lot of folks. But it's also going to go into engaging with the next generation, because that is just as important. Preserving that wealth, passing it as best we can tax efficiently is a very important step one, but also ensuring that hopefully those assets don't leave as they get passed to the next generation. So we're going to share some stats on how frequently that does occur, where the children of your existing clients maybe start working with another advisor or try to do it on their own after the passing of their parents. and how could we a little bit earlier on maybe start to engage that next generation, whether it's using technology or maybe just incorporating them in some of your existing planning meetings that you're already having. So with that, I always like to start with a quote. This one's by American philosopher Alfred Monapert. To accomplish great things, we must first dream, then visualize, then plan, believe, and act. And that does kind of fall in line with what a lot of what I'm going to talk about today. We start to following the planning process with a client, whether it's investment planning, tax planning, or estate planning. I think a very important first step is getting a good visualization of what the client wants to accomplish, what goals they'd like to make sure that they're able to cover within their lifetime, and then work from there on how we can be efficient with those next steps of wealth transfer and things like that. So then comes the planning. Obviously, we want to make sure that we believe in the process that we're placing in front of the client, and then of course, as important as anything else, make sure that we're actually acting on that. So I kind of already briefly ran through what I was going to talk about today, but I'll just run through the full agenda of what we're going to be covering. So we kind of already knocked out the introductions. I'm going to present a few stats behind that wealth challenge that Sarah mentioned, the Great Wealth Transfer. I like to think of it as the Great Wealth Challenge because the challenge is to, again, make sure we're maintaining those assets under management as they pass to the next generation. Integrating estate planning into your practice. So we are going to start with that and also use software to help how to demonstrate for the client what that transfer of assets might look like and how we can do so more efficiently. Then we're going to kind of transition the second half of today's session on some best practices on how to engage children of the existing client, so that next gen type audience. So we're going to focus first on maybe what concerns they have and how those concerns might differ from your everyday mass affluent client. And then, of course, how we can use technology to address those concerns and needs that they've got. Um, we're going to have time for Q&A at the end. Sarah mentioned I do have the questions box opened up here on my screen. So I'm going to try and keep an eye on those as they're coming in. But if they start to pile up, I'll probably start to defer to the end of today's session. Okay.
Hey,
So I wanted to start. Oh, yes,
Colin,
Sarah. Yep.
before you start, can you make the slideshow full screen?
Am I not sharing the? I might have chosen the wrong screen here. Let's see. Share. Ah, there we go. Shared the
Perfect.
wrong screen. Thank you very much, Sarah. I did see that chat come in. I assumed it was something they needed to do to make it full screen, but turns out it was on me. So there we go. Our first tech issue is hopefully behind us. So now that you can see everything full screen, what I wanted to present first was that great wealth challenge. The trillions of dollars that Sarah mentioned passing to the next generation, that's just over the next decade. If we expand that out to the next 2 decades, that number, I believe, more than doubles for that period. And then over here on the right-hand side, got some stats that I think really help understand why this is somewhat of a challenge. 90% of most children and their heirs will leave their parents' advisor upon receiving their inheritance. I also heard a great stat, well, not great stat, but an interesting stat the other day around what percentage of spouses actually leave their advisor when the primary spouse passes away. So our focus today is going to be on engaging children in those conversations, but I think it's also at least worth noting here at the top of the call, making sure that we're incorporating both individuals in all of these conversations is very important as well. I think particularly so when it's the male client that passes away first, the wife of that spouse moving on to another advisor, mainly because they didn't feel like that was their advisor, that was their spouse's advisor. There wasn't that connection maybe that they needed to stick around. So um, children, very important. But again, just to note, I think making sure that throughout the entire planning process, we're getting both individuals involved is extremely important. About half of financial advisors do not meet with anyone beyond the spouse and a family. So we're going to talk about that today and ways in which we can incorporate that next generation in those discussions. 76% of financial advisors admit that they haven't even reached out to the next generation of investors. So I believe outside of just the children of these existing clients, that is in many cases an untapped market. And then finally, 90% of ultra high net worth investors expect their wealth manager to provide tax planning and estate transfer advice. So that really just speaks to the fact that this is an expectation, I think, from the client's perspective. And I think there's a lot of value that can be created from the advisor's perspective as well, as we'll see today. Um, so main reasons clients leave after death. I don't think this probably comes as too much of a surprise, but just wanted to highlight some of these beneficiaries left after inheriting assets. So even if there was just one primary financial advisor that their parents were working with, moving on to someone else, maybe it's a friend of theirs in college that got into financial planning that they feel like they trust a little bit more and they don't have a direct relationship with their parents' advisors, that might be a good reason for them to leave. The next one is maybe the client themselves actually had multiple advisors that they were working with, and the person who was asked in the survey was not that primary advisor. So a third of the time, that might be the reason why they're leaving. Client was unhappy with the performance, and I think what these next few speak to is just the fact that those first two are far greater. So it's not necessarily the primary reason is that they're unhappy with performance or that the fees are too high, or they're unhappy with the services provided. While maybe those things could be improved, it's more so just because that relationship has not been established, maybe with that next generation. All right. So, what is estate planning? And I think for me personally, when I think about estate planning, it takes me back to studying for the CFP exam and all of these, crazy different trust strategies and things like that that you can implement the CRATs and CRUTs and QPERTs and things like that. And that is important. We're going to talk about addressing that and creating a great visual for clients to understand how to pass assets more efficiently to the next generation as we work through today's presentation. But the majority of these kind of key pillars of estate planning, I believe, are applicable to every client, regardless of maybe where their net worth stands, or how complex their estate planning situation might be. When it comes to appropriate asset titling, making sure that beneficiaries on accounts are set up appropriately. Um, I think I'd heard recently that after divorce, a lot of folks just neglect to change who their beneficiaries are on like 401ks and things like that. So sometimes just addressing that can be a huge lifesaver. Having a last will and testament, power of attorney, advanced medical directive, basically one through five, and I would also say seven, are things that I think are applicable to every single client that you're meeting with. Trust planning might still be applicable to a lot of them, but that really makes up a small portion of this estate planning conversation that I think clients are expecting out of their advisor. So the idea here is just that it's all important, and I've kind of broken these out as essential: account titling, beneficiary wills, planning for incapacity and control, which you might even look at those as being essential as well. Making sure you've got power of attorney, living will set up, healthcare proxy, all that good stuff. And then as a third category, that's maybe where we get into some of the more high net worth strategies where people might benefit from advanced trust strategies. Gifting strategies, I think that doesn't necessarily have to be high net worth. If somebody's charitably motivated, making sure that we're incorporating that into their financial plan is certainly going to be important. And then tax liability management, which again, depending on how we're approaching that, we're going to see today when it comes to like the long-term impact of a Roth conversion, that alone might create a better legacy scenario for the everyday client, not just those high net worth clients that you might be working with. So the reality here is that it's all important, and that finding a blend of all of these topics for a lot of clients is probably going to be the best approach. Um, so why is it important? I've laid out a few key benefits that both advisors and the clients feel that they're going to get out of having estate planning conversations with their clients. So just to hit some of the high notes here on the advisor side, matching client expectations. So as we talked about, tax and estate transfer advice for 90% of clients, they're expecting that to be part of what they're discussing with their advisor. Protect and capture revenue, retention of assets, connecting with the next generation, digital collaboration. And then I have this last bullet point here on the advisor side: solidifying yourself as the quarterback. So what I mean by this is, by talking about estate planning, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're an attorney or that you even have the capability of establishing the trust that you're discussing with the client. The idea here is that you're showing how that sort of strategy might gel with the rest of their overall financial plan. So the quarterback's not doing everything, but they are directing, right? The way that the play is going to run, calling audibles, making changes when needed. And the idea of being that quarterback is that you're that leader. Your name's on the letterhead of documents and things like that go out to that client. so that children are reaching out to with questions on maybe how to execute on the estate plan that you had in place or the will that maybe you've set up with those clients. From the client's perspective, ensuring the smooth transfer of wealth, having that peace of mind and knowing that at the end of their life, everything has been taken care of. I was just recently going through this with my parents. They've set me up as the executor of their estate, so I had to have a call with their attorney to make sure that everything was set up and in place. And I know that they personally felt much more of a peace of mind knowing that they had finally gotten around to start setting those things up. Avoid family strife. So that's one thing I'm going to touch very briefly on today. We've got a great feature in our tool called fairness planning, which is going to take a look at all the beneficiaries of the estate and ensure that everyone who we are intending to be so is equally taking part in the distribution of those assets. And the idea there is that one child of the client doesn't benefit more than the other, and then create animosity when they get together for Thanksgiving and things like that. So just knowing that their children aren't bickering after their death and that they're celebrating their life, I think is also something that provides some peace of mind. Avoiding probate, tax liability management, just to get to some of those at the bottom. Those, while I think they do speak to the peace of mind side, that's really where we're able to put some numbers behind some of the benefit that we're providing for clients by getting into the discussions that we're going to have today. What benefits do advisors expect from helping clients solve estate and trust planning challenges? Increasing revenue, improved customer experience, greater clarity of the client needs, and greater customer trust. So all of these top items really deal with just expanding the existing relationship and making that stronger with your existing client base. All right, I think this is the last slide before we start getting into kind of the overall approach to how we might address some of these concerns using technology with the client. But I did find this very interesting. The top reasons why clients don't have a will in place, and I start with this because I think a lot of folks think of a will as just the basic step number one of having an estate plan in place. Obviously, a will does not take care of everything. There are setting up beneficiaries on accounts takes priority. Having trust set up would take priority and give you a little bit more control at the end of your life. But at the very least, having a will in place so that there's some direction on what the intention of your client is at the end of their life. I think that is a very basic step one within the estate planning process. 40% said they hadn't gotten around to it. And I think that's kind of where my parents fell before they finally started to get themselves in order here recently. But some of these others I do think are a little bit more of a misconception. I don't have enough assets to leave to anyone. Well, that might feel like it's the case, but at the end of the day, even a small estate passing to the next generation, making sure that that fairness planning has been discussed and making sure that there's a plan in place to make sure any liabilities that still need to be covered are taken care of as well. So even if you're not leaving a ton of assets, it could just be avoiding leaving that next generation with a financial burden in many cases. I don't know how to get a will or living trust. That's where you come into play. It's too expensive to set up. Again, I think we all know that that's not true. Getting a will set up, even if I'm not working with an advisor, there's tons of websites out there that could at least give me a basic will and have that in place. I don't have anyone to leave my assets to. Even more reason to set up some sort of direction behind it, because that's just going to make things more confusing as to who should be receiving those assets at the end of their life. Takes too long to set up, and 4% said I'm worried about inflation or current financial markets, which that one might be the most difficult one to get past the client. The rest of these, I think, either come down to the client hasn't taken that step and they need that encouragement from their advisor, or some sort of misconception around what this process is going to look like for them as they try to execute it. All right, let's talk about integrating estate planning into your practice. And I want to kind of hit on most of these areas of the holistic planning process, starting with just understanding the client and prioritizing their goals. So, a way that we kind of approach this, and I know advisors have different approaches on maybe how they initially discuss with a client what their priorities are, what their expectations and concerns might be. But we do have a feature built into the Money Guide planning platform that just asks flat out, what are your expectations? What are your concerns? And the idea here is it doesn't add any sort of quantitative value necessarily to the plan, but it's supposed to increase the qualitative conversation that the advisor is having. They're letting us know very early on in the planning discussion what things are most important to them, the expectations being the positives, the concerns, I would argue, are even more important. Those are some of the negative things maybe bugging them in the back of their mind that they want to make sure that they accomplish and have a discussion around with their advisor. And the idea here is that before we get into the money side of things, we're letting them know, stick with us, go through this process. These are all things we're going to make sure we address throughout this discussion. We also have an interactive goal building process where they can start putting some money behind these goals and expectations that they've got. And the whole idea there is that we can interactively create a goal picture that is unique to that client's situation and not maybe just some boilerplate set of goals that we're laying out for all of our clients. So just wanted to show you kind of what these sections look like without actually getting into the tool itself just yet. Expectations and concerns, as I mentioned, identifying the concerns. It might feel like a negative at first, but after they start choosing what concerns them, we're immediately letting them know how this plan can help. So we're not just getting them thinking about a bunch of negative stuff early on in the discussion. We're having them tell us what those are, but also let them know, stick with us. Again, these are all things that we're going to make sure that we address and accomplish. And then the goal picture conversation, this is kind of what that layout looks like. It allows us to prioritize with them. What are those needs? What are those core expenses we got to make sure that we accomplish? What are the wants? So these are the things that we're maybe not going to enjoy retirement or our lifestyle without having in place. So in this case, paying for a daughter's wedding, making sure we can travel. And then finally, what are the things that we would like to accomplish? Maybe we know these things aren't in the cards. That's kind of what I mentally file as our wishes. But these folks would ideally like to have a bequest set aside for their children, and they'd like to have a little bit of fun on top of some of those want goals as well. So meant to be interactive and again, making this plan unique for the client in question. After that, we get into gathering and analyzing the data. So this is where we're going to be able to create a checklist for things like will, taking a look at what the beneficiary designations look like. So these are all things that we're going to make sure that we're documenting, having a conversation around. We can also model the impact of changing those designations. So to have maybe a little bit more control as to who directly receives those assets at the end of their life. We could talk about, hey, what if we decide instead of leaving these to the spouse, we leave these to the children, and what implication that might have from a tax perspective. Power of attorney. Do they have advanced medical directive? So again, a lot of these things are not specific or unique to the ultra high net worth. These are conversations that are going to be important across the board for all clients. Getting into some of those next steps, do they have or need a living trust? Do they intend to make charitable gifts to family or charity? And are estate reduction or estate tax planning strategies needed? So a lot of these things, hopefully, we can identify as we're going through the plan building process itself. Next, we get into analyzing the data to uncover some of those gaps, and then developing a plan around that. So, do they have an immediate concern or need for tax reduction strategies? Are they interested in passing wealth more tax efficiently? And I kind of want to go through a couple of sections here in the tool to help understand how maybe we would address these things. So, really quickly, we're going to come back to PowerPoint here in just a moment. But I'm going to pull up a plan that I'm working on for clients, and I'll go ahead and make this full screen. So if you're not familiar with the Money Guide tool, this is Money Guide Elite, which will have more information on how you can get that free trial that Sarah mentioned at the top of the call when we wrap up today. But this is kind of the takeaway, if you will, when you initially build a plan. We really like to arrive at a strong probability of success, and there's a number of tools over there on the left-hand side that can help get us there. But this client currently finds himself doing pretty well when it comes to their ability to fund goals at 83%. We do kind of find that that's in the confidence zone, so that's not a bad place to be. But after we get to that point, the conversation might change a little bit on how can we improve things further. So even if it's not improving their ability to fund goals necessarily, how can we improve what passes to that next generation? And without getting into our more advanced estate planning tool, Wealth Studios, which we'll touch on here shortly, there's a number of things that you can do within the goal plan itself, keep things a little bit more interactive, and start to have a conversation around passing assets more efficiently. So what I'm looking at here is our tax planning module, and what this is highlighting is my client's taxable income sources throughout retirement. So we've already had a conversation with them about delaying Social Security. So notice they retire in year 2049, but Social Security doesn't start until they get to age 70, a few years down the road. We see RMDs aren't going to start until they get to age 75. So what this has opened up for many folks is an opportunity in the earlier years of their retirement to maybe take advantage of some of those lower tax brackets through something like a Roth conversion. And of course, there could be immediate impacts on the income tax saving side that might improve their probability of success, but that also could enhance the assets that are left to the next generation and hopefully providing some tax-free withdrawals. So what I'm going to do is just turn on this Roth conversion strategy. And what I've said in this case is that I would like to convert enough throughout those years of lower taxation to fully maximize the 12% tax bracket. For some reason there, it didn't turn on for me. I might have gotten timed out because I was sitting on the screen for a little bit before this webinar started. We'll see if I turn that back on now, if that works. But the idea here is, there we go. In yellow, we're filling up that 12% bracket, getting them right up to the cusp of the 22% bracket. So not trying to kind of overexpose them to a high tax liability in those earlier years. But over on the right-hand side, we can see the impact that has on income tax savings, which in this trial is very significant, 240,000 throughout their life by reducing those future RMDs. We can see the impact on Medicare results. So if we're able to keep them out of some of those higher Medicare tiers, it might reduce some of their expenses associated with Medicare Part B and Part D. So not as significant as the tax savings, but still, I would say noteworthy there, $40,000 in savings. But we can also start to have a high level conversation around end of plan asset values. So this is where if I roll my mouse over that, we can see what impact this has with the strategy versus without. Taking this even a step further and highlighting how much more in the form of Roth they're leaving. So if I were to take these values into after tax dollars, the amount that's left over for that next generation would be even more significant than what we're seeing in these pre-tax totals over here on the right-hand side. Furthermore, always as a nice bonus, it did increase their ability to fund goals as well, up to 85%. Okay. So that's just one example. Without getting into a really intensive estate planning conversation, we can start to show value to the client on how we are creating a better legacy situation. And again, I don't think that that's necessarily a strategy that's exclusive to the high net worth space. These clients obviously have quite a bit of wealth there that they were able to pass, but that type of strategy can be beneficial across the board. Also, within this tool, there is the ability to start creating some of those checklists that we mentioned, making sure that they've got things like a will, power of attorney, medical directive, healthcare power of attorney. And then there's also a question here, are they currently working with an estate attorney? If not, maybe you have someone in-house that you could refer them to get those next steps across. So, you can select if they have a will, document when that was established, when it was last reviewed. And these will all create action items within our plan summary to say, hey, is this something maybe we need to revisit or readdress? Or if they haven't had these conversations at all, these are probably things that we need to start with on the estate planning side. There is also a basic estate analysis, but I wanted to take this one step further on kind of the planning and acting side of things by just briefly showing you some of the capabilities that we've got within Wealth Studios as well. And so the way we kind of see the progression of these plans going in many cases is I think the goal plan is great for establishing in a very interactive way that initial plan with a client. And for potentially kind of the mass affluent space, that might be the final plan that you create for the client as well. It is very comprehensive. But for those clients that maybe find themselves more in the high net worth space, or maybe they just have more significant cash flow concerns that need to be addressed, I think that's really where Wealth Studios, which is what I'm looking at now, comes into play. And so if I go just to first death here, which I know sounds kind of morbid, but what this is looking at is the transfer of assets at the end of the first spouse's life. So what we have in this situation is actually a blended family. Sue and Bill are married, but Sue has children from a previous marriage, and Sue also owns the vast majority of their assets. She's got an LLC in place. She's got a bunch of other investment assets that are under her ownership primarily. And the way things are set up right now is at her death, since she's a little bit older as well, we're assuming she passes away first, everything is passing to Bill. And so at first death, that might not seem completely off the wall. There might be small things we could do, like changing their qualified asset beneficiaries to give her a little bit of control there. without having necessarily to work with an attorney. That's an easy switch that we could make to make sure that assets are being passed directly to her two children, James and Beth. So we can see a small portion of that now has been carved out in the form of a beneficiary transfer. We could also talk about maybe setting up something like a revocable trust. So I've got this revocable trust funding a CST um, that we can see here over on the right-hand side. And that's also going to increase at the end of his life, Bill's life, how much passes to James and Beth. So that helped things at the end of her life. Where we start to maybe see issues more so coming into play is when we get into second death. And I did document their wills in this case. Both of them said that they were going to leave their assets to each other. But unfortunately, if she passes away first, there's very little control over making sure that her children are taken care of at the end of Bill's life. And so that's what this second death is addressing. And I see two issues immediately popping up here. The majority of their assets are now passing to a third party. That could be Beth and James if Bill decides that, but it could be someone else as well. I also see extremely significant taxes and expenses occurring. So this is where, I might change my view here really quickly if I were trying to really hammer home some of the issues that come up without having an estate plan in place. And this is where we do see the CST paying out to Beth and James, not insignificant amounts by any means, but a much larger value passing on to that third party here on our family tree. So the other thing I've done here is I've set up a spousal lifetime access trust. So again, we are starting to get into some of the more advanced conversations, but I went ahead and put the Carter Rental LLC in that slat, and now we can see a much better picture here. We're not leaving whoever that third party is completely hanging, but we are starting to see more of those assets passing to Beth and James. And if I go back to my list view, we're not completely disinheriting Bill. That slat is still paying him income throughout his life. So we can see that value is passing. Actually, if I go back to first death, we can see survivor income and the annual income that trust is continuing to distribute. Okay, last thing I want to touch on while we're here, before we get back into our PowerPoint and start talking about engaging with that next generation. I mentioned this a little bit, but having a conversation around making sure that the distribution of assets is fair, I think is extremely important. And that's where this open fairness planning comes into play. So there are two beneficiaries in this case, James and Beth. I would hope that this $90,000 delta would not be something that would cause them to bicker if they're both inheriting close to 16 million in this case. But again, if we're talking about smaller amounts, 90,000 is a very significant difference that might cause some strife between James and Beth. And where this is being pulled from is James has received some financial support back in 2020. Looks like his wedding was paid for back in 2012. And so Beth might feel as if she's been wronged a little bit here. So what I've done here is I've just gone ahead and set up a gifting strategy, $30,000 per year for the next 3 years. Turning that strategy on has completely equalized their estate and hopefully allowed Sue and Bill to see that everything is even Stevens at the end of their life and assets are passing fairly to that next generation. So a lot of great talking points that can stem from this. There's over 15 different trust strategies. Obviously, we don't have time to get into that today, but just a great way to interactively discuss with a client maybe some of their concerns that they had around that next gen planning, and then also start providing solutions. Right, we're not drawing up trust within this tool necessarily, but we are showing how those strategies could impact that overall financial plan. So I'm going to jump back here into my PowerPoint. Let me get out of full screen. There we go. And just to round things out, when we talk about implementation and monitoring of these strategies that we're discussing with the client, just having something built into that tangible report that you're giving to the client or something that they can access within their client portal as well, that documents that these discussions were had. And very importantly, if they don't have some of those more basic estate planning documents in place like will and durable power of attorney, making sure that all of those things are being documented within the report itself and that they are being held accountable for the next steps required to put those things into action. Okay, and there's the strategy I discussed with them. Consider that Roth conversion maybe to potentially enhance that next generation wealth. All right, engaging the next generation. So we're kind of changing gears here a little bit. Obviously, I was looking at Sue and Bill, who were on the older side, and more so focused on estate planning after making sure all of their goals while they were alive were accomplished and funded. Now I want to talk about ways in which I might be able to engage with their children that we saw as a part of the plan. So at least I already know that they exist. So what are some things that I could do to maybe tap into the concerns or I guess the planning conversations that would be more pertinent to someone that falls within that generation? So I'm bringing up some of those same stats again, just as a reminder: 90% children and heirs leave their parents' advisor upon receiving their inheritance. About half of financial advisors do not meet with anyone beyond a spouse and family. And again, that's 76% that have that admit that they have not even started or begun to reach out to that next generation when it comes to planning. So this is where, I could just kind of like to lay out the tools that are available, at least here at InvestNet Money Guide. And I know there are other solutions out there that can help address a lot of these concerns as well. The Money Guide goal-based planning tool that I started with and showing that those tax planning strategies. I think that's kind of our bread and butter when it comes to planning. The vast majority of clients could benefit just from start to finish going through that Money Guide conversation. Wealth Studios, we kind of see more for cash flow or ultra high net worth planning. We do also have an offering in the form of My Blocks, which I think helps us do a little bit more modular planning where we're not as focused on retirement. If you're meeting with a 30-year-old client, 25-year-old client that just got out of college and they do have financial concerns that are at the forefront of their mind, I can almost promise you it's not retirement. And that's not to say that retirement isn't something they should be thinking about that early on. As we all know, the time value of money, the earlier we can get them thinking about some of those long-term goals that they'd like to accomplish, the better. More time we have to actually save for those events. That said, they have more pressing issues that they'd like to address. So instead of forcing them through an entire retirement plan, we might be able to address those individual concerns a little bit more head on using modular planning approach to maybe address debt management first, making sure their emergency savings fund is where it needs to be. Are they trying to buy a house, saving up for a down payment for that first house? So more short-term goals that they'd like to accomplish would probably be of a little bit more importance than retirement planning or estate planning. Okay. So as we talk about those concerns, I kind of wanted to reference not just one, but maybe a couple of different sources here on what the top concerns might be for what we would consider to be that next generation, millennials, Gen Zs. So this one was actually pulled from a Y Pulse survey. So this was actually surveying millennials and Gen Zs of the top 10 financial concerns that these folks have. And I don't think any of these are a surprise to many folks, but making sure their savings is appropriate. So I personally think of that as emergency savings, maybe not necessarily long-term investment savings, but you might incorporate that into that category as well. Debt management, student loans is a completely different bullet point, but that falls within the debt management side of things as well. Probably makes up a significant portion of a lot of these folks' debt. College tuition, so maybe they have children of their own that were just born, and they're trying to make sure that they can cover that. Buying a home, paying rent, retirement is on the list, which that makes me very happy to see. Since retirement planning is a big focus at Money Guide, the fact that folks are thinking about this at an earlier and earlier age, I think, is very nice to see. Employment, car payments, investments. So the other list that I'm looking at, which is not necessarily serving millennials or Gen Zs, this is actually from CFP.net. Top 10 steps to achieve financial freedom. So these folks that maybe aren't in a position of financial freedom yet, what are the first things or topics that they need to make sure that they're hitting? And there's a lot of overlap, right, between what millennials and Gen Zs are concerned about, and then also maybe what the CFP board says would be important to address with folks in that same generation. So I found quite a bit of overlap between the two of these. So I made a nice little confusing connect the dots here of crafting a relate to rent and car payments, pay down area, savings kind of connects to creating a per day. So with this type of overlap, this is where I kind of added my own little art to the list. I went ahead and made kind of a modified top 10, where instead of having those that were connecting to each other, what did I see as kind of some commonality between those two lists, to help kind of simplify things of what we're looking at today. So all of these, in some capacity, addressed within the Money Guide platform, and hopefully can be addressed in whatever planning tool that you're currently using uh, with your client. But have, in my opinion, some overlap cards. One with a really high interest rate, one on the lower side. You got some student loan debt on top of that. I need to make sure I'm paying that down efficiently as well, and also getting that emergency savings where it needs to be. And I'd also like to maybe have some fun, take trips, buy a home at some point. So, so there are a lot of these can be considered as part of an overall, maybe think of it as like a 10-year financial plan for the client to try and get them to that point of financial freedom referenced in the previous slide. So what I'm going to quickly demonstrate for us right now is a tactic that's going to allow us to at least address four of these. We don't have time to get into necessarily all of them today. Obviously, crafting a budget, I think, is pretty straightforward, which is at the top of the list there. That might be your very important step one for these folks. But after we get past that and we understand what their spending looks like, their income and their outflows, that's maybe where we can turn our attention to addressing some of these more specific items. So just a couple of slides here before we get into addressing that from a planning perspective. When it comes to emergency savings, I think the general rule that we hear is 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. Um, Again, knocking out that budgeting process first is probably going to be very important to understand. First off, what can they actually put into emergency savings on a month-to-month basis, but also understanding what that 3 to 6 months actually looks like. Are there things that maybe we would, realistically exclude from our spending if we went through like a short-term period of unemployment, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that I got to take my income for 3 months and or 6 months, and that needs to be what I have in emergency savings. There are probably things they're spending money on while they're working that they wouldn't if they went through that short-term unemployment. So laying out that budget, very important first step. Also, just as a side note, I have heard more of a personal anecdote. A lot of advisors extending past the 6 month mark. I think the pandemic was a huge precursor to that, where folks said, hey, there could be longer term periods of unemployment. So having even more in emergency savings might not be a bad place to be. I've heard as much as 12 months. Savings should be deposited high liquid, low risk accounts. So it doesn't necessarily have to be sitting in cash in a checking account. There are, small growth accounts like a money market fund, CD, that might be looked at as a little bit more liquid with obviously very low risk. And remind clients that it's for true emergencies. That's something I find myself reminding my wife of all the time when I think about our emergency savings, what the purpose of that is set aside. That doesn't mean that we have all these savings to do all these other things. That's there for unfortunate events that might transpire. When it comes to debt management, I just had a few key stats here around how this is impacting a lot of the Gen Z and millennial generations. So we have some average debt numbers there. For Gen Z, I just have 18 through 28. I think that's actually 15 through 28 currently is the age range of Gen Z. But 18 is probably when the significant debt begins. And so we can see that there's very significant debt within both of those generations, maybe a little bit more on the millennial side. Student loan debt makes up a huge portion of that. First quarter of 2025, that was about 1.81 trillion in total student loan debt outstanding. Um, what I found interesting is that the age group 18 to 29 only accounted for 34% of that total. So assuming that if you're less than age 18, you're not going to have any student loan debt for the most part, there might be some exceptions. That means that a lot of folks are carrying this debt far past age 29. So it's a very long lasting debt that even if they aren't in the earlier stages of their career, they might still have some of this lingering. Um, there is a significant portion that owe six figures in student loan debt, the top 6% there. Um, there's value to it. It's not to say that this is a bad thing to start taking on. We do see that those folks with college degrees have a 71% higher pay rate than those with high school degrees. So there is a payoff to this. Finding that balance is certainly important. And interest rates are typically lower. So as we're trying to find a balance between paying off credit cards versus student loans, that's definitely something to consider. On that note, with credit card debt, just a couple again stats behind that. Total debt of American households, 18.39 trillion. Um, you can see that in addition to student loan debt, college graduates typically have more credit card debt as well that they're having to kind of off. Interest rates are usually higher, so it might make more sense to focus on what income we have on month-to-month basis to pay that down first. And then I thought this was interesting. It was the only form of debt that dropped during the pandemic by 9%, which I found to be odd. But I think people were just spending less in general. I would have assumed if people were maybe out of work during that period, they would have had to rely on credit card spending. But I thought, just add a silver lining, like the showing folks with college degrees earning more. I think the silver lining with credit card debt is maybe there was some education around this during the pandemic that caused people to not rack up quite so much. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at how we can address a lot of those things that I just mentioned all in one place. And this is where I am going to rely on my blocks here, which hopefully I did not get logged out. I'm just going to quickly click into something because I think some of that stuff. Okay, looks like we're good. So, when it comes to addressing those more short-term needs, like I said, some of these things can be done at least initially in a vacuum, but seeing the larger picture and how they all connect to each other, I think is very important. And that's where this next best dollar series of blocks truly shines. What this is going to look at, you can see over here on the left-hand side, are some of those common concerns that we just talked about. And then the ultimate payoff is that when we get into the your results section, it's going to start to analyze how can a client most efficiently meet each and every one of these concerns. And if you think about that, I think there's benefits from both the client's perspective and the advisors. From the client's perspective, it's getting them to that point of financial freedom as efficiently as we possibly can. With the income that they've got, the debt they've got, the goals they'd like to accomplish, how can we put them in a good position as quickly as possible? And then from the advisor's perspective, I am putting something in front of maybe the children of my existing clients that is much more important than a retirement plan. And B, if maybe today they aren't the ideal client, this is hopefully going to get them there a lot faster. So if they don't have the assets that would typically meet the minimum of the client that you typically work with, we're not doing them any favors by just leaving them to their own devices to get to that point. This might help get them to that point a little bit faster. So it starts with protect yourself, where we're going to run through a few questions. This is a block in and of itself as well. We're going to run through questions to first establish what they need in an emergency fund. And then based on their current savings rate, how long is it going to take them to get there? And if we'd like to solve for a specific date and say, hey, we'd like to be at 6 months by January of next year, it'll calculate back to them what they would need to put away on a monthly basis to meet that goal. So that is a standalone conversation you can have outside of this law. That we're big ones that we're going to address here within this conversation are credit card debts, as well as student loans. They thankfully don't have any student loans, but they do have two credit cards. One with like a 31% interest rate, and the other with a much lower interest rate that they need to pay off. Next is planning for the long term. So I know retirement was on that list of concerns that the millennial and Gen Z generations have. It's maybe not the first thing we're going to start with, but if I do have a job that offers a match on my 401k, making sure that we're not leaving money on the table, I think is very important there. If I'm getting a 50% match, that's certainly going to outpace any sort of interest rate I've got, hopefully, on any of the credit cards or student loan debt that I've got. So we do collect information around existing retirement funds and HSAs. And then finally, we want them to have a little bit of fun here. What upcoming goals do they have? So this is where they can say, hey, we would like to go to Europe in 3 years. And that's, a fun trip we'd like to plan for. Or in this case, they're saving up for a down payment on their first home. So making sure we are incorporating those more fun things that we want to make sure are a part of this analysis as well. So after collecting that information and going through those individual block experiences, we're going to get to the your results page. And this is where we're going to bring everything together. In the top left, What we see highlighted here is the total amount on a monthly basis that after going through each one of these sections, they said they were putting towards these goals. So that's the cumulative amount month to month they're using to pay off debt, put in savings, whatever it may be. Over here on the right-hand side is looking at next month. So starting in September of this year, here's maybe what we should do first. Notice that a huge chunk of that is going towards the credit card debt. Specifically, there's a Capital One card in here with a 31% interest rate. A lot of that is being devoted to getting that paid off as quickly as possible. This 250 going into retirement, that's 4% of their income because they had a 50% match on 4% going into their 401k. So again, we don't want to leave money on the table. Their emergency savings is almost where it needs to be. So we do have a significant amount going there as well. And they have a due date on when they'd like to buy that home. So we're trying to make sure we put enough towards that as well. Now, if I go to this payment and savings schedule, this is going to basically create a 10-year financial plan to most efficiently meet those needs. So this is where I can go month by month, starting in September of this year. So maybe I'll progress here to 2026. And it's going to start to show when those goals are met. So that's what these circles represent. Their Capital One card is paid off in February of next year, Amex in April. If I continue to move through here, maybe to 2027, their emergency fund is where it needs to be. 2028, I think, is when they wanted to have that down payment home value saved. So that we've accomplished that goal as well. So this is helping them understand not only when those goals are going to be accomplished, but also track portfolio value over time as well, so that we can see 10 years from now what position this type of spend down would put them in. So I know I personally could have benefited greatly from something like this. If somebody put something like this in front of me when I first graduated college, I think I could have maybe personally put myself in a better position much faster. What I want to look at now, though, is just how we can incorporate some of these discussions within a client meeting. So the first one, or not within a client meeting, but with that next generation. But the first point there is initiating a conversation with the next generation in some of your existing client meetings. So, not getting into maybe the concerns that they have, but just finding ways in which I can introduce myself to the children of some of my existing clients. So, encouraging clients to bring their adult children into the relationship. And then there are specific financial planning topics that I think pertain to them, even if they aren't directly around meeting their own debts, payoffs, and things like that. So, one example I always like to bring up is long term care. And maybe this is speaking more towards the adult children, but this is just a screenshot of kind of what a 3-year long term care expense might look like for a client. And what we see here is a situation where if they encountered 3 years worth of a long term care expense, that's what's showing in green versus blue, their portfolio value without that long term care expense, it doesn't completely liquidate their portfolio. In fact, they still have close to 300 grand left over at the end of that period. So as a client, I might look at this and say, okay, well, I'll self-insure, right? It's highly unlikely that I'm going to be in a nursing home for longer than 3 years. This looks like something I can fund and still maintain my life. So who is really kind of at risk here? Well, probably the individuals that stood to inherit these assets at the end of their life, right? So if I maybe am looking at implementing some sort of long-term care insurance with these folks, it might be something that their children are willing to help foot the bill for if it's to protect that nest egg that's eventually going to pass to them anyway. And I have heard a couple of advisors who use a long-term care conversation as an opportunity to get their foot in the door with the next generation, invite them into that client meeting. Obviously, if that's okay with your existing client, to talk about the impact of this type of expense on their parents' portfolio value. So that was just one example. Again, without getting into some of those other topics that we've already talked about that would pertain to those clients. Some of the other things, probably things that you're already doing, but I think a lot of what I just showed you can help enhance those. So when you're doing seminars or family events, or if you're leading things through like a social media campaign, I think what is maybe missing a lot of times in these is a call to action. So there might be a great article that you're sharing on social media, or maybe you have an event where you're talking about, social security planning or debt management or something like that. And there's a lot of great information that is passed to someone that attends that. But where's the call to action to make it personal for them? And I think that's where that my blocks conversation, or however you're addressing those concerns of the next generation, becomes so important. And there is something called self-registration for those my blocks as well. So, for example, if you do prescribe to that, um, there is a button here that you could put on your website, or you could put in like a social media link that you're posting that allows someone to directly self-write that like 10-year plan for the client. They can go through that without ever having a meeting with you. So the idea there would be that they go through, maybe get some short-term answers, most likely be left with some very significant questions that would require a follow-up with you as their advisor to answer. So it's a great way to get your foot in the door. And again, if nothing else, create some sort of call to action with these events or social media campaigns that you're putting on for your existing clients or new prospects. And then I think just in general, embracing technology whenever possible. We're again kind of beating a dead horse a little bit with a lot of the stuff that I'm sure you're seeing out there, but it's almost an expectation for a lot of these next generation investors to have everything at their fingertips. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want or need to have a financial advisor as a part of that process. But I do think some of the initial steps for providing information online, that next generation is far more comfortable doing that. And it's obviously they're a little bit more fluent in technology as well, and their capabilities of doing that than maybe some of the older generation that folks have been working with in the past. All right. So really quick here, clients, even at its most, initiating some of these commerce clients is going to be very important. These are split discussion, interactive, and very data technologies impede customer experience and expectations.
Hi everyone. Sorry for all the interruptions. Oh,
Oh,
we got it back.
I'm
Hi,
sorry.
Colin. No
Yeah,
worries.
it
Your internet was
cut
a
off for a
little
second. I'm not
choppy.
sure when I cut off, but let's
It was
see
just at
here.
the key takeaways. So you were
Okay. Good. Yeah, I don't know what happened here. I'm in the office, so we're gonna blame the Wi-Fi here at the office. I'll have to talk to IT about that. Can you still see my screen? Am I still sharing?
no, you were
Okay.
not.
Well, all I had left, Sarah, if you'd like to share the call to action slide, was my call to action slide, which is how you can get more information on Money Guide. So maybe I'll just get you to share that, Sarah, rather than us going back and forth. Um, and I'll just say thank you to everyone for joining. I'm going to hang on the line and see what questions have come in that weren't already addressed. It looked like there were a few that were already being answered. So I'll pull those up now.
Yeah, and while he's pulling that up, thank you so much, Colin. This was very informational. If any of you are interested in Investment Money Guide, then you can start your free trial today. I'm going to drop a phone number as well as Brad's email address so that you can just get in contact with him. He is, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, XYPN's dedicated point of contact for Money Guide. And then if you want to book a screen share as well, I'm also including Brad's Calendly link. So all in the chat there. And then if you are interested in joining XYPN membership or just curious what other things are included in our tech stack, then I'm going to drop our Calendly link as well to schedule a call. And then last but not least, as you leave the webinar, there's going to be a survey that pops up at the end. We love feedback. We love hearing what you all want to see specifically. So please do consider giving us a rating, suggesting any topics of interest. We'd love to know what you think. Otherwise, yeah, what one question can we address right now?
Let's see. So, looks like a lot of folks were asking about seeing the key takeaways. So I apologize for that tech issue there. One question came in and said a lot of the folks in the audience use Right Capital or maybe X Money Guide Pro users. what is one feature that Money Guide Pro can do with this wealth transition audience sets it apart from other planning solutions. So I can't speak directly too much to what Right Capital offers on the wealth transfer side. I do know that if you've used Money Guide Pro in the past, it might be worth looking into at least getting a trial that Wealth Studios that I demonstrated earlier. That's going to take you through a pretty advanced view of wealth transfer with the clients and give you, I said 15 trust strategies, but on top of that, there's a ton of other estate planning strategies that are available there. And it just does a really good job of taking the interactive nature that I think Money Guide has always had. And it offers it for what I think is in many cases a much more advanced and harder to understand concept of estate planning. So it does a good job of bridging that gap of making estate planning, which is sometimes a stuffy conversation, very interactive. So again, as far as what Right Capital offers in that way, I'm not 100% sure on, but that would be something worth looking into if maybe you've only used Money Guide Pro in the past.
Sweet, right on. And that is our time for today. Thank you again, Colin and Brad, for joining us today and just talking about this really important topic. Um, I hope that everybody has a great rest of your day and hope to see you all in Austin. Take care.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.